to This Week in Cleantech. It's a roundup of this week's biggest stories that you need to know about in climate and clean energy. Did you see my wife walking out of the frame behind me? It's her birthday. So I guess it was cool if she made the cameo. We do this show in under 15 minutes or less if I don't ad-lib too much. Today is Friday, February 7th, 2024. I'm the Factor This content director, Paul Gerke. You heard it right. I said Factor This. Because if you haven't seen it already on the World Wide Web, Renewable Energy World, Power Grid International, and Hydro Review, now under one masthead. We're coming together, Mike. It's called Factor This. Go check it out. Sorry, I had to get the plug in case people were confused. Matthew Zeitlin from Heatmap is going to be joining us on the show shortly. Heatmap, a great resource. There's another plug. All free. I'm out here doing the people's work. As always, I'm joined by Cleantech commentator Mike Casey of TigerCom, patiently waiting in the wings. Mike, your boy John Engel are going to be out of the mix for the next few weeks, so you're going to be getting a heavy dose of the big fella. How does that make you feel?
I want you to know I've got a list here from Engel he sent me. Okay,
and so list.
It's a list. No, it's a list. He said, "Dear Mike, here's what you are to instruct Paul. He is not to trash my star trailer. He is not to make noise after 10 o'clock at night. He is not to be drinking, especially at my makeup stand." It just goes on and on. There's more conditions than like an Airbnb rental. So I just think, oh, and by the way, let him know he is merely warming my seat. He is never going to take my place. I'm just saying, you guys have some crazy dynamics there. I don't want a part of it. I'm just the messenger. All right.
Listen,
so
I'm just glad I don't have to answer any of his emails when he's gone, because I can't imagine how flooded the inbox is with complaints and also stuff from the fans, the people that watch the show, the important listeners. We thank all of you who interact with us and say that you get something out of the show. We're just having fun out here. And if you want to be a part of the show, by the way, you can email stories that you think should be on the show, rew@clarionevents.com. We'll have a link in the episode description as well. That email might change in the future, but we'll get that to you when it does. Anyway, let's get into the stories because we're probably at 15 minutes already. Mike, what are we talking about?
Yeah, and two quick listener shout-outs, Justin Chandler, and we have a new listener, Bethany Rue, who said, quote, "I can't wait to check this out. Thanks to both." Our first story, J.L. Holzman from Heatmap. I'm telling you, I just want you to know, I strongly suspect that Heatmap has Venmoing payments to Alex Peterson because we keep picking Heatmap stories and Heatmap writers. I think there's a under-the-cover paid relationship. But nonetheless, J.L.'s story, Trump has paralyzed renewables permitting, leaked memo reveals. Mr. Gerke.
So, Mike, I don't know, maybe it's just Heatmap does good journalism. Can we just throw that out there? And maybe that's a possibility instead of one of your wild Nova conspiracy theories. Anyway, there's a memo that came out this week from American Clean Power Association about Trump's day one executive orders. You've read about these. We've been writing about them. Everybody that works in this space, freezing some final decisions on renewable energy projects on federal lands for 60 days. Also halted pre-decisional work from the Army Corps of Engineers, which oversees the wetlands and species protection part of all of it. This Army Corps of Engineers determines whether certain areas are protected from development under the Clean Water Act, but now the agency is getting harder to reach, like a lot of government entities and information on the government-hosted websites, and they won't say whether federally protected wetlands are located at construction sites. So developers have got to receive this information to avoid legal problems down the road. This stands to be a major roadblock in the permitting process. Mike, what do you think?
Showing my age, I remember the refrain 12 years ago from the fossil fuel lobby during the phony Solyndra non-scandal where they kept saying, "Isn't it time renewables stand on their own 2 feet?" So here we go, 12 years later, and the highly profitable, mature fracking industry seems to need the Trump administration's thumb on the scales because they're losing the price war. So now we're going to jam up permitting for renewable energy projects and move gas projects to the front of the line. This is otherwise known as bureaucratic vandalism. Paul,
wow.
story number two, my man.
Or all of the above energy, Mike, one of the, depending on your perspective. Second one, another story that a lot of folks were writing about. I actually wrote about this too, but we'll give a shout out to Sammy Roth of the LA Times. This is Boiling Point. Farewell to Ivanpah, the world's ugliest solar plant. Mike, tell us about it.
About 15 years ago, PG&E agreed to buy power from the concentrated solar plant Ivanpah in the desert near the Nevada border, and federal officials approved $1.6 billion of loan guarantees. This type of solar power uses sunlight reflected off mirrors to heat fluid in giant towers and generate steam. The power from this project has been a lot more expensive than expected due to setbacks and underproduction that was a threat to the birds that flew above it, which is why PG&E has stopped buying electricity from it. People were pretty excited about concentrating solar 15 years ago. I was there, I remember that. But it proved to be harder to produce than expected. And at the same time, PV prices kept dropping, so the industry just couldn't keep up. Now, 2 of the 3 towers are expected to shut down in 2026. Ivanpah owners have not paid off the project's $1.6 billion federal loan. And it's unclear if they ever will be able to. Paul, your thoughts?
You can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. It's hard to fault PG&E, even if you want to fault utilities in general for a litany of other reasons. And it's honestly hard to fault the DOE because you can't have progress without creative destruction. And that's what Ivanpah was. They had no idea that concentrated solar was eventually going to be so hilariously poor in cost comparison to solar PV. The price decline that we've seen in that in the battery space, I don't think anyone had their thumb on 15 years ago. So I think it's okay to admit sometimes that some of our experiments don't necessarily work the way we want them to. And it's also okay to move on from them instead of continuing to charge taxpayers and ratepayers in those areas an exorbitant amount of money for power they could get a lot cheaper. So anyway, Mike, tell us about our third story.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I should say that the Department of Energy's loan guarantee program, its mission is to loan money to the harder to fund stuff. And they have a 94.6% success rate, which is way above what commercial investment tends to get. So just because we've got one failure here does not mean the program was off base. Our third story, Brian Eckhouse and Ming Jong Lee from Bloomberg, the $100 billion Stargate AI venture touted by Trump to depend partly on solar power. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, partly is doing a lot of lifting in this headline, I think. You heard about this Stargate. You have to say it like that, Stargate. SoftBank Group, OpenAI, Oracle Group. It's a $100 billion venture now. I think somebody said something about $500 billion at some point. It's backed by Trump, and sources familiar with the matter told Bloomberg that they're going to rely partly on clean power sources like solar and batteries. AI is going to depend a lot on how we can supply it with electricity in any way possible. That all of the above approach we talked about earlier, it can't just be solar and batteries. We're going to be using natural gas and hopefully not too much coal power, but we'll be talking about that again in a second. Mike, tell me what you think about this.
You know, it's interesting, Paul. I've been hearing from a couple of CEOs in the industry that if you want to win the AI race, speed is of the essence. And if speed is your primary concern, you have to build storage and solar behind the meter to back up your interconnection, which is almost a requirement if you have data centers that really can never shut down. And so the idea that you're going to kill solar and wind while having the AI revolution be won by the United States, they're just in tension. You can't do both of them at the same time. I think that gives us a little bit of hope that reality will come to bear on ideology. Paul, our fourth story.
Number 4, Mark Levy at AP News, entitled Big Tech Wants to Plug Data Centers Right into Power Plants and Utilities Say It's Not Fair. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is going to be the story of the next several years. Big Tech's interest and how it plays out on the power grid. They are seeking direct connections to power plants to avoid expensive grid upgrades that can result in them taking a significant portion of available power and leaving less for regular consumers. This issue has already led to delays and complications for utilities. Take, for example, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which recently rejected a proposal for Amazon Web Services to build a data center near the Susquehanna nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. That plant was intended to supply 960 megawatts, about 40% of its capacity, to the data center, which would have had enough power to been using enough power for 500,000 homes. So it's not clear whether FERC is going to take this matter up again with the change of administrations, but their decision sets a precedent for other deals down the road. Paul.
So, Mike, this is what's so infuriating when you're talking about this current administration stomping on energy justice initiatives, because this is where it comes into play the most. Because by selling directly to Amazon, Susquehanna can ensure a much higher price, guarantee that price for electricity, than selling it to the broader open market. Because Amazon has the pockets. Jeff Bezos can say, I will buy power no matter what the price is, and I'll lock it in for 20, 30, 40 years at rates that other entities cannot compete with. Talon Energy, Susquehanna's majority owner, estimates that deal could bring it up to $140 million in electricity sales by 2028. But like you said, AWS would be avoiding interconnection stuff. Market watchdogs like Monitoring Analytics warn that if this model is extended out to other nuclear plants, it could significantly raise energy prices. Selling directly to large consumers at higher rates is going to mess with market supply and drive up prices for everybody else.
All right, story number 5. Matthew Zeitlin of Heatmap, welcome to the show. I think it's your first time being with us. We appreciate you coming on. You've got a story. Georgia's green manufacturing boom is keeping coal plants open. We want people to read the story if they have not yet. Matthew, what is the key takeaway?
Yeah, so Georgia Power, which is the big utility down there, they're doing their every 3 year. Actually, recently it's been more than every 3 year exercise where they lay out to the state regulators what they think they need in terms of power resources over the next, several years, decade plus. And they say what they need. They say what kind of power plants they want to open, build, what kind of power they want to acquire. And in this one, the Integrated Resource Plan, they pointed out that the manufacturing and data centers are really, really being drawn to Georgia. A lot of clean tech, a lot of battery, EV, stuff like that is there. They require a lot of power. And what the Georgia Power wants to do is they want to, as part of this plan, is keep coal plants open past 2034, maybe even all the way up to 2038 and 2039. A lot of these plants have been kind of earmarked to be closed in 2022, when they were last doing this exercise, when there was much less power demand being forecast. But now they're expecting something like 7% load growth annually for the rest of the decade. They don't really feel like they're in the position where they can really close down almost anything that they have on the grid right now. So they're keeping stuff open and then they're acquiring more power. So in the last time they did this, it meant building some new gas plants and also acquiring, over the last few years, they've said they want to acquire up to 4,000 megawatts of renewables, which would be the equivalent of 4 new nuclear reactors of renewables.
Matthew, when you gauge the temperature of the room here, do you think we're in an environment where keeping coal plants open a lot longer than we would have anticipated is probably going to be what happens here? Even if those load growth projections are a bit overblown, which the DeepSeek news from last week might lend a little credence to?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think utilities and energy and RTOs, regional trading organizations that oversee grids, are definitely kind of erring on the side of reliability and energy security, and they don't seem like they're in any rush to close this stuff down, because when a lot of these plans were made, the assumption was that electricity demand would grow at something like 0.5% a year, which is what was the case for the first 20 or so years of this century, and in some parts of the country, it's forecast to grow at 7%. And so even if that estimate is 2x, it's 2 times off, that's still 3.5% growth per year, which would be, a 7-time increase based off that 0.5% we were experiencing earlier. So it just makes it hard for a reliability organization or utility to say, like, we're going to close down something that's currently operating.
Matthew, in your reporting, did you get the sense that the utilities are going for the more reliably profitable option by keeping uneconomical coal plants open and passing the costs on to consumers versus building renewables and storage? What
It's
is your
definitely
take on
true
that?
that like the utilities' established business model sometimes makes renewable development trickier for them and how their business works. And they're largely acquiring renewables and letting other people develop them. And as far as, and they're not building new coal plants. I mean, I think the worry sometimes is that they want to add stuff to the rate base. That would mean big capital projects. And you see that sometimes with natural gas. Like, there are definitely utilities that are building new natural gas plants, and Georgia Power is one of them. But in this round, they were kind of more focused on just keeping open what they already had. And it's much easier to push out a retirement date than it is to ask regulators for permission to spend hundreds of millions of dollars building a new power plant, which you then put into the rate base and have your ratepayers pay for.
All right, Matthew, let's squeeze in one more quick one real fast. If you had one thing to leave with our audience that they should be looking into to learn a little more about this situation and what's going on with load growth down there in the American Southeast, where would you direct them? Where should we be looking?
Heatmap.news.
There it is.
I've been writing about this nonstop, before and after the changeover in administrations. I was writing about coal plants staying open. That will not change. And we've been doing a ton of reporting, as we talked about earlier on the show, really day by day, hour by hour reporting from these agencies, from the renewable developers. It's very, but by the time this goes up, a lot of stuff could have changed. And if it has changed, go on heatmap.news and you will find out about it.
Thank you, Matthew. You call that a softball in the business, Mike. Let's get to Cleantecher. Cleantech Leader of the Week. It's Liz Burdock, CEO of Oceantic Network. Now, Liz was open about the tough road ahead for offshore wind, another thing you've been reading a lot about if you listen to this show. But Liz reminds us that despite those obstacles, we got to stay together, stay united, keep fighting for our future as a community. Congrats, Liz, our Cleantech Leader of the Week.
Good. We want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, and Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin for helping gather these stories.
And shout out to Matthew for joining us on this episode of This Week in Clean Tech. Please subscribe, give us some feedback, tell Mike to stay in his Star trailer, or share story suggestions. Read all the articles we discussed this week, clicking on the links in the episode description underneath where you're watching this video. Take care, folks.
Take care, all. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.